Hello and welcome to the Digital Publishing Podcast with me, Simon Mellins. Episode 14, Sustainable Digital Publishing. In this episode, I interview publishing sustainability expert and consultant, Jonathan Griffin. And we're back again, joining you from this dastardly grey afternoon here in London. And I am sadly down one co-host, as Simon Holt is unwell today and unable to join us for this episode, so we wish him better. That said, I'm thrilled for this episode of the Digital Publishing Podcast to be joined by Jonathan Griffin, a sustainable publishing expert. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Good, despite the weather.
Yes, well, yeah, I guess if we're already talking about outside, so sustainability seems par for the course. Perhaps for those who don't know who you are, I'll just briefly explain how this even came about. I was at the IPG Awards back when it was still lovely out, and as they do, they kind of seat you. I assume they have some sort of hat they pull from, and I was lucky enough to be put next to Jonathan, and you kind of find out what someone does, and I couldn't quite believe. Because this is something I'm fascinated with broadly with kind of digital technology and its effect on the environment. So I was extremely lucky to be sat next to somebody who is a genuine authority on these topics. So perhaps, Jonathan, you could get us started by talking a little bit about yourself and what your role is.
Sure, yeah. So I've been working in publishing for about 30 years or so.
Just that.
Just 30 years seems like a long time, doesn't it? So actually, I mean, it is. I started in the last century. How I came to be working in publishing was completely random. So I was in a bar on one of the outlying islands in Hong Kong, and I'd been backpacking, and I needed to raise some funds to get home. And I was in the bar with some friends, one of whom was resident in Hong Kong, and she was trying to persuade another one of my friends to work with her at Macmillan. And she didn't ask me for some reason, and maybe she thought my friend was a bit more literate than me. But anyway, I needed a job, so I volunteered myself, and that's how it started. I didn't appreciate at the time that Hong Kong was, and still is, in fact, a centre for English language publishing. So many of the big publishers had offices there, and with hindsight, it's helpful to remember that, because I often hear feedback about why is it that publishers, English publishers, are publishing in China. Actually, it's because there is a kind of unrivaled expertise in certain types of publishing that has its roots in Hong Kong's colonial history. So I started in the 1990s. I originally worked for Longman, and I did actually start doing digital publishing then. So specifically, I worked on a project in which we were using document assembly software on legal precedents. So that was Hong Kong, and then I moved back to the UK just after the handover, and I worked for Thomson Reuters and specifically on an online service called Westlaw, which and I think that with hindsight, again, that was a really fortunate experience, because Westlaw, I don't know whether it can be described as being groundbreaking from a digital publishing perspective, but it was launched in 1975. So when I started working on the service, there was a really significant degree of digital publishing expertise within the organization. So that's something that I was able to learn from. Right. And take me on to my next job, which was working for the British Standards Institution, And I was product owner for the development of a groundbreaking database. So BSI were moving from publishing a PDF format to XML, and so we worked, a big team worked together to create a much more flexible and modern database. So I was there for about 5 years, and then I think I got quite bored actually. So I moved on to the Publishers Licensing Society, who you may, or your listeners may be familiar with. So they manage secondary licensing on behalf of publishers, and secondary licensing is where someone wants to reuse something that has been published. So a good example, a traditional example, would be when a school wants to photocopy an educational book to use in the classroom. So there, I worked on another significant digital product development. So I was the product owner for the development of a workflow tool called PLS Clear, which continues to go from strength to strength. And when it was launched, it won a couple of innovation awards. So that was a very satisfying few years from a digital publishing perspective.
Right.
And then the last thing I'll mention, the last digital publishing related aspect of my long career would be I moved on from PLS to work for IFIS Publishing, who are different again. So they are an STM academic publisher, quite niche, specializing in food science. But they also were principally a digital publisher, so we managed a big database. But I again fortunate because they had developed a really close partnership with an informatics company called Molecular Connections, and so we did a lot of really interesting machine learning / AI related work. And with their help, I actually gave a speech at a conference in 2019 talking about AI and suggesting that its potential was limited. Obviously, with hindsight, that was what happened with ChatGPT, I think, came as a big surprise to people in the field because it has developed so rapidly. But the basis for my pessimism was that there are kind of three components to successful AI, and one is software, and that's there, and the other is the computing power, and that's there too. And the third component is data. And I think, although there isn't too much spotlight on this at the moment, data remains a significant issue with AI applications, partly because the data is unstructured and unwieldy, but partly because it is scraped from the internet, which means that really valuable content is behind paywalls and not included. So when investigating this area, I've relied on some excellent journalism from the FT and from The Economist, both of which you can't access using Gemini or ChatGPT. So there remains some truth in my somewhat pessimistic view. So just to finish up on my background, so principally over those 30 years or so, it has been around digital product development, but I have latterly, over just under the last 10 years or so, also taken on general management roles. So I was the managing director at IFIS Publishing, and most recently I've been managing director at a professional association. So I also have some general management background. I should perhaps talk about sustainability as well, very briefly.
Yes, please do.
Yes. So yes, with sustainability, so this is an area that I have been involved in for the last 8 years or so. So
Right.
I joined a organisation called Bioregional, who um, are a not-for-profit organisation working in the sustainability field, and they actually recruited me as a trustee because of my digital publishing background. So they were developing a digital platform. Um, so they were looking for some input into that work. Um, but I've been with them for 8 years now, and in the last 4 years, I've been the chairman of their board, and so that has given me a really well-rounded view of the sustainability landscape. So, and obviously, as a trustee and a chair, I've been responsible ultimately for the development of their strategy, and they have become a very successful sustainability consultancy. Last year, they won Sustainability Consultancy of the Year at the Business Green Awards.
Wow.
So it's been a privilege to be involved with them as
Yeah.
well.
Amazing. What a fantastic story. It always strikes me when I ask people that question, particularly when they've been in the industry for a while. It's always these kind of strange, unexpected journeys to get to where people end up in publishing. I don't know how much that's unique to our sector, but I do find it interesting. People have always kind of had not quite what they planned out when they left
Yeah,
university.
I mean, basically, I've gone where the wind has taken me, but
Right,
it's been
right.
a very interesting journey. So that's for sure.
I love that. Well, you were very kind to focus particularly on the digital aspect of your own journey there, and of course, this is the Digital Publishing Podcast. So I wanted to start really by asking you about the assumptions people make. Right, we tend to assume digital publishing is inherently more sustainable than print, just because there's no paper, shipping lorries, what have you. Uh, is this broadly true? Or are we underplaying the kind of hidden environmental costs of digital publishing when we make that kind of statement?
So, I mean, the simple answer to that is that digital publishing is more sustainable. But I think it's perhaps maybe we should perhaps take a step back and talk about definitions, because I think people tend to conflate sustainability with environmental matters. But I think sustainability is actually more than that. And from a publishing perspective, I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of the simplest definition is that it is about planet, but it is also about people. And so that's about ensuring that there are policies and procedures in place that prevent discrimination and exploitation. And it's also about profit as well. And so a key part of my consultancy work is ensuring that all three of those elements are included in the work
Right,
that's done.
right.
So, but going back to your question, so if we focus on the environment, there is a simple answer, and that is yes. Digital publishing is more environmentally friendly, and there's not a lot of data about this, but perhaps the most illustrative is data that The Economist have shared recently.
But not shared with AI.
Well, no, good. Well, that's true. That's true. And so I think I discovered this data by looking at their sustainability report or something like that. I can't remember. But
Right.
anyway, so what they showed, looking at emissions from the paper version of their weekly magazine versus the digital version, was that the paper version emitted 12 times as much harmful carbon
Wow.
emissions as the digital version. Um, and I,
Is that full cycle emissions, in other
yeah,
words?
so I think that gives you a sense of the difference. But I mean, we can talk a bit more perhaps about the complexities arising from that. If that,
Yeah, because I'm thinking about data centers, servers, rare earth minerals to make the devices. It must be incredibly difficult to come up with kind of earnest figures and how much someone uses one device and whatnot.
yes, it is. It is challenging, and it's this is a relatively nascent area, but well, as with most things in with particularly with carbon reporting, it's complicated and there are some issues around accuracy, but there is a standard for um, analysing emissions from digital products and services that is being used.
Okay,
It's called DIMPAC, which is a contraction of digital impact, and it was developed by Bristol University and a consultancy that specialises in publishing. And
right.
they were really, it was the purpose of the guidance or the metrics was to manage, to get a clearer sense of digital product and service emissions. And that looks at, I mean, one of the issues is around drawing boundaries. So it looks at the use phase specifically, and identifies the three areas that you were talking about. So it provides guidance on how to quantify emissions from data center related processes. So that's around how you ingest content, you store it, encode it, host it, and so forth. So that's data coming from principally from cloud-based services like AWS and Microsoft. It
Right.
also looks at emissions from internet distribution infrastructure, so internet networks, and that's particularly difficult to measure. But again, there's some averages that can be used to that end. And then lastly, it looks at emissions from end user devices during use, and that's about managing time, so Google Analytics helps with that. So it is possible to measure, and so we're seeing the Economist is one of the publishers that was involved in this, in putting together and applying this standard. It's also being used by other media companies like Netflix and the BBC. So it certainly enables us to get a broad view of the difference
Right.
between them. And
Right. And good faith comparisons, right, with a common standard like that.
yes, exactly. That's right. And I think from a publisher's perspective, um, if you're concerned about emissions only, which actually probably isn't that realistic, nonetheless, a digital first strategy is preferable. And in
Right.
fact, it's not just digital first, it's also cloud focused as well. So I've certainly worked with a couple of publishers who've made the transition from on site servers to cloud based servers, and that has a really significant impact. So
Right.
there was some
So economies of scale type thing.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's right. And actually kind of reflects the fact that the big um, internet providers are doing a good job. But to give you a sense of the scale, Accenture, for example, produced some research which suggests that on average there's like an 84% saving in emissions if you move to the cloud.
Wow.
Elsevier have done this recently and reported it last year in their sustainability report, and have estimate they've saved about 4,000 tons of carbon by making that transition to cloud-based. So
Wow.
that's a really significant step to take in terms of managing emissions.
Amazing. Now, you spoke about emissions perhaps not being the only thing to talk about. What were you hinting at there?
Well, so I think carbon emissions are perhaps the most significant area to focus on because, again, taking a step back, and if we think about we should think about climate change because that ultimately is what we're concerned with. So
Right.
I think, well, I say ultimately, that is what we should be, in terms of priorities, that's where the focus needs to
Yeah.
be, I think, certainly
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are other areas that are relevant. So we know from recent reports that, in the context of AI, that water use is a big issue, and it is true that servers generally need to use a lot of water to cool them as they heat. At the moment, it does, whilst there's a lot of talk about the amount of water that's being used, there isn't much evidence to suggest that that is currently having a significant damaging effect. But it is something that is of concern and
Yeah.
should be a focus going forward.
Yeah.
And the other area is the use of minerals in devices, and that's obviously those minerals are a finite resource, but again,
Right.
there is nothing to suggest that we're close to depletion, and that there are mitigating effects that can be taken to manage them.
Right. I'm fascinated by the water consumption question. I'm sure many of our listeners are subscribed to George Walkley, former podcast guest, to his amazing weekly newsletter, and he's shared articles multiple times about this water consumption question. It seems like quite a live area of debate, particularly when you think about where is water loss, right? In a kind of closed cooling system, which I assume is what the water is generally used for. Um, uh, you have to think water consumption. At what point is it evaporating versus cooling and recycling? Where do you stand on all of this? And maybe you can help clarify my understanding of this and how serious this problem really is.
Well, so this is something that I've researched, and I have actually struggled to find case studies in which current use of water in server farms is causing real life issues. And more than that, I think um, that it feels like the big companies like Google, for example, are endeavoring to take a responsible attitude towards the use of water and extractions from water tables and so forth. So I can give you a kind of real, a very current example. So I think it was
Please.
yesterday that Google announced a really big investment um, in a data center in just north of London, and there were two aspects of that caught my eye. So firstly, they were reporting that 95% of the energy that they will use in that data center will be from renewable sources. And secondly, to the point about water, they had done analysis which suggested that drawing water from local water tables was problematic, and therefore they're not doing it. So they're using air cooling to manage the heat that's generated from the servers.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I mean, George may have a different view, but at the moment, it feels like it's a manageable challenge.
Yeah, I mean, George was sharing articles from other people talking about this, I suppose, because it's a live debate. And I suppose to an extent we are conflating data centers with AI compute, right? Which presumably has a more severe impact. Is that a fair statement?
Insofar as AI is more computing intensive and requires more water to cool, Yes, that's right.
And is it something that we should think about making that delineation? So if we're talking about a digital, perhaps we need to separate that broader digital discussion from the AI one, where we're so compute heavy, and where perhaps the resource use is more relevant. I hear all kinds of examples people give about an AI search is as bad as boiling a kettle in your house, or all these kind of examples. I think people are confused about energy use and also how much water they are wasting, quote unquote, every time they do a search. Where do you think all of this is in the real world? And I appreciate it's different from provider to provider.
Yes, so I think that's right, and where I stand on AI currently is I think on balance it's a really positive development, and and I think it's in some respects it's encouraging that people are concerned and that they're worried
Yeah, yeah,
about the developments, and I mean, it is inherently problematic because what we're doing is looking into the future, and so it's very difficult to tell exactly how things are going to fall out. But there was an article in the Economist recently in which they suggested the doom mongering was misplaced, and I think I share that view. So it is true that there are likely to be really significant increased demand for electricity from AI, and there are estimates that demand could double or triple in the next 5 years. I think that's what Goldman Sachs have predicted. But actually, countering that is increasing speculation about whether AI is a bubble in terms of the valuations aren't reflected in the hype, and in
yeah,
terms of
yeah.
the fact that there isn't a return on the investments that are being made. So that's one aspect of it. And then
Yes. Hello, OpenAI.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. And then another consideration is that in terms of demand for electricity and the emissions that are arising, it's actually relatively low currently. So IT emissions as a whole, I think last year were about 1.5% of all carbon
Wow.
emissions. So it's a low
My
base, and you
goodness.
can
So what's the huge one then? That's amazing.
well, yeah. So that's a good question. So some kind of points of comparison would be, and I don't know whether you're a vegetarian, Simon, but beef consumption is around about 5% of global emissions. So that's one example.
Right.
More serious, road transport, 12%.
What about shipping?
Uh, Shipping is, I don't think it's, I think it's round about 1 or 2%. So it's also
Okay.
quite low. Um,
Right. We're missing a lot of percent here.
Yeah, it's true. Well, so food systems. Examples of areas that consume or cause the greatest amount of emissions include things like the food system, which is about a third.
Right.
Buildings, that's
Wow.
also about a third.
Ah.
So that gives you a sense of perspective on IT and AI.
Right. Yeah.
But
That's so important from the way that we discuss this. I think we lose that.
yes, I think it is. And so just like continuing on this theme, I think there is a real issue about given the increased demand for electricity that will cause a strain on the grid, and there's a question mark about whether that's manageable. But at the moment, it's not clear that it is it's not a significant real world problem. I didn't answer your question about the specifics around emissions. And so I think um, possibly the stats that you've suggested around AI-powered searching are overblown. I mean, certainly Google in the last couple of weeks, I think, have produced some stats around use of Gemini. Yeah, and they've gone. They've not just produced figures, but they've also explained the methodology, so it's subject to analysis. And what they said was, if you do a Gemini text prompt, then that is equivalent to watching 9 seconds of TV, 1 second of powering a microwave. It's the amount of water that's required for that text prompt is 5 drops of water. And what's more, they're suggesting that the footprint or the energy requirements are coming down as well.
Right.
So there's an argument that perhaps our focus on this area is a distraction from the bigger areas of concern. And there's another element to talk about as well. And so increased electricity to power the data centers, definitely. Whether or not that electricity comes from renewable sources is also at question. So we need to be really concerned about climate change. Climate change is caused by the use of fossil fuels. So simply managing that is about reducing the use of fossil fuels. So electricity from renewable sources is fine. So then the question is, to what extent are Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and the hyperscalers, as they're called, using renewable energy in their development of AI?
So if we're focusing so much on how much energy they're using, perhaps instead we should be asking, where is that energy coming from, right? If that was solar energy entirely, for instance, then why are we worried?
Yeah, so the issue is much less significant if that is the case. And I think that there's a lot of uncertainty about this, and so Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have all made really clear, comprehensive commitments to being to reaching net zero and being carbon negative. So Microsoft are aiming for 2030, Google are aiming for 2030 as well, Amazon for 2040. And there is a question mark about whether they're going to achieve that with the rapid increase in energy demands from AI. My feeling is that they're not doing this because of a vague moral concern about future generations. It's much more likely to be about the practicalities of innovation and competition, and so they need reliable, scalable power, and that the best source of that is from non-fossil based sources. So as we've seen in the last few years, there's a lot of price instability around fossil fuels. So it makes sense for them to be looking at developing nuclear and geothermal as well as other renewables as means of powering their electricity.
Yeah. Gosh, when you think of all of the other externalities that could affect fossil fuels, right, the geopolitical instability, of course,
yes.
Plenty of that affecting oil and gas at the moment in different parts of the world.
Exactly.
So that makes sense, a kind of capitalist incentive to still do this, even if it's not a moral position.
Yeah, because I think it's quite easy to be cynical about large multinational corporations, but if you reframe it in terms of self-interest, then it seems a bit more persuasive, really.
Yeah. And I guess public image too, right? That if people are saying, "Oh, this is terrible for the environment," then they won't use. Some people won't use the
Yeah,
product. I'm sure
absolutely.
there are plenty of people who think they're helping the environment now by avoiding AI.
Yes, indeed, and that brings me on to another aspect of AI that I thought that you might be interested in,
Great.
and I guess are familiar with, but I think it's really important to highlight this. So it is, and that is, what positive impact can AI have on reducing carbon emissions? So it's not simply about
Yeah,
pushing them up. It's also about, can it be used to pull them down? Um, and
absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to
and
know.
and actually there is, again, this is all quite new, but in terms of sources, that the International Energy Agency, which is a credible source, are suggesting that AI does have the potential to reduce emissions, and in fact it's attempted to quantify it. So what it said is that for every 4 grams of carbon emissions emitted by emitted the global data center, it's a relationship of about 25%. So um, applying AI, 1 gram of carbon applied to AI will potentially lead to a 4 gram reduction, so 25%.
Wow.
And that
What by what kind of mechanism?
so so yeah, so that and that has been explored further in an article published in one of Nature's journals in June. So this is a peer-reviewed article produced by the Grantham Institute, and they support that analysis, and the areas that they've looked at. They looked at 3 areas: so power, transport, and food, which make up about 50% of emissions in total. And obviously, we're not. Food is not particularly relevant to digital publishers, but power and transport are. Um,
Right.
so, to give you more concrete examples of how AI is being used to reduce emissions, um, in the context of power, um, the view is that AI can be used to accelerate decarbonisation of the grid, and that's around using AI to more effectively balance demand, and it's already happening.
Okay.
So, the UK's largest energy provider, Octopus, are using AI to balance demand more effectively. And last year they reported that they had saved 27 million tonnes of carbon dioxide
Wow.
by applying that. So that's one example. Another one that's relevant to publishers is around transportation. So, from a shipping perspective, coming back to Hong Kong and all those books being shipped around the world, AI is being used to optimize routes and deliveries. So, Maersk, who I know that many publishers use to ship books, are using AI to optimize their routes, and they're reporting last year, I think, that they'd managed to reduce fuel consumption by 5% by applying AI. So that was a
Wow.
1.5 million
Wow.
ton saving.
Yeah, that's 5% of a very big pie, right?
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
significant
absolutely.
number.
And then also so shipping's a big deal for publishers. Also road freight as well, and
Right.
big logistics companies like UPS are using AI to optimize routes too, and reporting fuel savings in destinations like
Right.
London and so forth. So
Right.
so that claim, or that projection, that AI is going to have a positive impact on reducing carbon emissions, it is already beginning to become reality.
Right. If even further complicating any assertion we might make about it being a net positive or negative for the environment,
Yes,
right? When we
indeed.
have all of these different
Indeed, there
factors.
was an article I read recently which suggested that we should actually be using AI more often rather than less often, on the basis that that will speed up the building of the infrastructure that will result in reduction of emissions. I don't
Wow.
think the guy was being serious, but nonetheless, you can see how it was possible to make that argument.
Yeah. Gosh. So I want to try my best to stay true to our digital publishing arena here, even though there's so much else we could talk about with effects of AI on publishing um, sustainability overall. But in the digital realm, what kind of specific actionable steps could we maybe give our listeners in terms of reducing the environmental footprint of their digital publishing efforts, whether that's green coding practices or data center choice or file formats or anything at all? Do you have anything you could give us in that vein?
Yes, indeed. So I think when it comes to um, optimize or reducing emissions on digital platforms and products, there is this idea that you should be reducing the weight of your websites and your digital services, and that's around being mindful of the fact um, that the bigger the the service, the number of pages you have, that has implications in terms of electricity use and therefore in terms of emissions. So um, thinking about how you can manage that more efficiently is a way of reducing emissions. So that includes things like asking whether the images that you use, whether you need to use as many, whether they can be optimized. It's about ensuring your code is efficient. It's about avoiding unnecessary features and again, thinking about in terms of weight. So do you really need to use videos? Do you need to use customized fonts? Do you need those widgets? And so forth. And just thinking about kind of accessibility in more general terms, this is something that you should be doing as well. But if you're thinking about the environment and sustainability, maybe that's an added push in the right direction. But really, you should be doing everything you can to improve the discoverability of content on your website or on your services. And so that's about UX improvements and actually potentially using AI to do it as well. So
So we've come full circle.
yeah, indeed, exactly. Can't get away from it. And
Yeah.
then in terms of using the platforms, cloud providers. So as we've discussed, I mean, services like Google and Microsoft are making concerted efforts to be more sustainable and to provide transparency around what they're doing. And so Microsoft, for example, has a sustainability manager online which you can access if you're using 365, and that will give you data about the emissions per Microsoft user, for example. So that's something that you
Brilliant.
can use to quantify as a kind of benchmark for aiming for emissions reductions. Um, there are, I think, a growing number of hosting providers who are emphasizing their green credentials. I mean, so basically they are using renewable energy to power those servers. So there are examples like Green Geeks and DreamHost, um, and I guess again coming back to something we talked about at the very beginning. If you want to make a big change and you've got on-premises servers, stop using them and migrate to the cloud because you'll make a huge saving that way.
Brilliant. Jonathan, this is amazing. I had other questions to ask you, but they've all sort of come out in as we've been going through all this. So thank you so much for being so thorough in the way that you've connected topics. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience in this particular context about ways that they can help the sustainability battle that we should all be fighting, and whether that's utilizing AI or whether that's something else? Is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
So I think, I mean, given my experience of working with publishers on developing sustainability plans, I think it's really important that this is it's a all organisation holistic kind of activity that's being undertaken, and it's been undertaken applying best practice and using third-party certification to ensure that there is that the claims that are being made are credible. So it's important that an organisation starts with a carbon footprint. And whilst it is the case that large publishers like Elsevier and Bloomsbury and Pearson have done that, actually the majority of publishers have not done it in a systematic way in which they have they've looked at each of their functions and identified what the emissions are and considered how they can plan to reduce those. So what I'm saying is that if you look at this simply from a digital publishing perspective, then obviously there are things that you can do, but ideally this is an activity that's undertaken at an organizational level, so everyone needs to be involved, not just someone who's working in production.
Right. And one assumes that those evaluations need to be made and made again, right? It needs to be a frequent re-evaluation of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best practice is that you do a carbon footprint for your whole organization. You then consider in each of the functions how you are going to plan to reduce those emissions. And then 12 months later, annually, you review that progress.
Right.
So, yeah.
Amazing. Jonathan, thank you so much for giving us this kind of source-filled, fact-focused take on what has become a very heavily discussed area, and for keeping us on track with our digital publishing focus. I really can't thank you enough for everything that you shared with us today. If people want to keep in touch with your journey, 30 years on, what else you're up to, where is the best place for them to find you?
So, yes, contact me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And that's Jonathan Griffin. You can get his name in the episode title and in the notes. And fantastic. Jonathan is really fantastic to follow and to kind of keep in touch about this amazing area. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today and providing us with this fantastic insight. We are going to keep track of this topic. This is something I'm really keen to stay on top of, and to not just focus on the digital products themselves in this podcast, but also their effect on the wider world. So, Jonathan, you may get another email in your inbox. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you, Simon.
And thank you to everybody for listening to another episode of the Digital Publishing Podcast.